Would somebody like to read a few verses from 12 onwards, at least down 12 to 20?
Should
I have
Barry?
heard the... Sorry, carry on, whoever.
No, you go.
Okay. Lost my place now. I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. That evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent." The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much and some little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. So Moses said, "Oh, sorry."
Sorry, no, it's okay. Go on, finish.
Down to 20, did you?
Yes, keep going.
Okay. Then Moses said to them, "No one is to keep any of it until morning." However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them.
Thank you very much. Now, it's a passage, a story with which I think everybody is familiar. And so that I'm just wondering, was there anything when you read it before, or as you were listening just now, was there anything that stood out, anything that jumps out at you that you had not noticed before?
What I found interesting was when I was reading, some gathered much and some gathered little. You think some were being greedy and some were being sort of modest about it. But then when they weighed it, it was just what each of them needed. That was God's guiding hand.
Yes. And everyone, it says, had gathered just as much as they needed.
Yes.
So that's the intriguing thing. In Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, I think it's chapter 9, he writes the practice of sharing what they have with others. And the principle about stewardship that Paul writes about, he says it's not that we're wanting some to get abundance while others are impoverished. What we're after is trying to create a situation in which everybody has the same. Everybody has just what they needed. So it's a bit like that. And you know that manna, word that's translated manna, means what is it? The point that God had made about his response to their grumbling was that by his provision, they would know that it was the Lord who had brought them out. It's the Lord who's supplying their needs. They're learning all the time. Who is this Yahweh? Who is this Jehovah? And they're learning about the God of deliverance. He's the God who answers prayer. He's the God who supplies what they need. And all of that is really, really important. So although it's some time before things are spelt out to them that are actually in the law, there are things here which are important that they're learning about all the time. They're learning about the things of God. It's just sad that it took them 40 years ultimately to learn.
Yeah, it's hopeless, yeah.
The other thing just to mention is when I sent the second email out, I asked whether you notice that there's something that we don't read in these accounts. Did anybody work out what it was that they were not actually, that we do not read about them? They grumble in the morning, they grumble in the evening, they grumble in the middle of the day. They're moaning and worrying. They're constantly asking Moses to do a miracle for them, seeking God's provision all the time. But we don't read anywhere anything about thanksgiving.
No. Or prayer. Mm.
Well, not really, even not prayer as we would understand it either. But there's no apparent gratitude when they get an amazing miracle like the Red Sea parts and so. Well, they had a party on the other side, but that was led by the ladies in the main, and there's a whole sense in which they're experiencing God's deliverance and not saying thank you. And I wonder, it challenges me about the importance of praising God and saying thank you. And so I put in the email to you a reference to what Paul wrote to Timothy. He was writing about the fact that there were some people who were still going around teaching the rules and regulations of the old covenant and mixing up the old covenant with the new covenant. But he says that anything can be eaten. So that some saying, oh, you can't eat pork and you can't eat donkey or whatever, And so he says everything can be eaten with thanksgiving. And I find that a real challenge. When I live on my own, it's ever so easy to have a meal and make it nice and simple, and you sit it on a tray on your lap and got your television on and you're watching the news or whatever is on while you're eating. And it's ever so easy to get out of the habit of giving thanks. So I hope that I'm the exception in the group and that everybody else does remember to give thanks for the food that you eat. Because Paul particularly talks about eating and anything with thanksgiving.
I think, some of us have problems with our weight. I'm one of them. And summer of last year, I started a different sort of way of eating, which was the Michael Mosley plan, and it has done quite a lot of good. I didn't lose a great deal of weight. I've lost some, but it's improved a few other things. And since our golden wedding celebration, I've slipped off the Mediterranean eating plan, and over Christmas I've slipped a little bit further off the plan. And I've realized that I'm beginning to gain back my sweet tooth, and I know unless I make a really concerted effort to do something about it, that I will begin to want to eat more and more cake and more chocolate and so on, which is not going to do me any good. Well, it's going to do me some actual harm. And I'm aware that I rarely give thanks when I eat things like that. And I think that I don't do it because I know that it's harmful for me.
Right.
And I wonder if I started to actually give thanks when I eat those things, it would actually alert me to the fact that I know I shouldn't be eating them.
You'll have to let that one out, I think.
I wonder whether it would do me good to do that, because, it's a treat. It should be a treat, and it shouldn't be part of everyday meals and so on. And so it might be something which is a good discipline for me. And not just something I save for proper meals.
Worth trying.
Yeah.
The point I think that comes home to me is that how we are to ask God to intervene and do something for us, to meet our needs, to solve our problems, and whether we are as respectful as we ought to be with regard to what God does and give him thanks and praise. Now, we've already had a situation with this story of they're coming across bitter water, and God does a miracle and makes that drinkable. So they're experiencing God's provision. And here they're getting experiences like the manna and so on. And one would long to see them having a praise party and really worshipping God and thanking God for all he does. But I feel human nature is such that we're slow to say thank you. And of course, the great story in the New Testament is the healing of the 10 lepers who, when Jesus was on his way from Nazareth down to Jerusalem, or might not have been Nazareth, but it was certainly in Galilee, and he's on his way down, and on the border he comes across 10 men, probably in some sort of line grouped together, who are lepers, and they crawl out to Jesus for healing, and he tells them to go and show themselves to the priest, which is what they would need to do to get a certificate to say that they were clean from leprosy. And as they go, they suddenly find they're healed, and 9 of them goes on and finishes their job. 1 of them comes back to say thank you to Jesus. And when the gospel writer is saying about it, he says only 1 has returned, and he's a Samaritan. So almost how sad it is that the people of God have forgotten how to give thanks to the Lord. Right, okay, now we've got the situation of some of them not keeping to the regulations.
Can I just say something, Barry?
Sorry, say again, David.
Because to me, this has got nothing to do with Thanksgiving. This is about equality. That God gives our daily bread. He doesn't give us, I think he does in his wisdom give us abundance, but we pray for our daily bread. And I think that the big sin is, however much we're thankful, if our brother's got it's starving, how can we be thankful? Our demonstration of thankfulness is about making sure that everybody has enough. And I think that's what sometimes I think it's all about, oh, this is what God's given me, thank you very much. But God's given us enough so that all can share. And the fact that God, it just demonstrates here how God gives. He gives, even those who gathered a lot, they didn't have too much. And even those who gathered a little didn't have too little. Everyone had enough for themselves. And I think one of the biggest sins in the Christian world today is are people who are on the streets and starving. Christians are indulging in food.
Yes.
And to me, I think this is one of the underlining principles of the holy nation. That everybody's got a role.
Yes.
Everybody is equal under God, and God cares for the rich and the poor.
Yeah, thank you, David. It was for that reason I started by pointing that out, first of all, that it ties in with the principle of stewardship in the New Testament, which is a principle of making sure that everybody has enough. And that was in the life of the church they were keen about. And so there was grumbling at one time because the widows, who the Gentile widows, were not having their daily, they weren't having what they were entitled to, and the Jewish women seemed to be. And so there was a complaint about it. And that's why the 7 were appointed to what we now think of as a diaconate, and they were appointed to make sure that everybody had enough. So Stephen and others had that duty. So the point that David is emphasizing, if I'm right, is about the principle of ensuring that everybody had enough. So that's one of the things that were mentioned about the importance of it. But they had to go and collect it. It didn't just drop in as a nice, neat parcel in their lap. It came in, and they did have to do some work in order to get it. And it was only every day, each day, the provision that was made as far as manna is concerned in the morning was that they were not to keep it. And if they kept it overnight, it began to be full of maggots and to smell. And so Moses was very angry with them because they weren't. And you remember that God had said, we looked at it last week, that his provision was going to test them. So he's providing, but he's also testing them. Thank you, David. Anybody else want to comment? Okay, well, let's read on a bit more. So we've got to verse 21. So let's read from verse 21 and let's go. Can we go from 21 to the end of the chapter, please? Anybody with any translation?
Each morning, everyone gathered as much as he needed. And when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much. Two of the communities came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is a day of rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until the morning." So they saved it until morning, as Moses commanded. And it did not stink or get maggots in it. "Eat it today," Moses said, "because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will not be any." Nevertheless, some of the people went out on the seventh day to gather it, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath, and that is why the sixth day he gives you the bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where he is on the seventh day. No one is to go out." So the people rested on the seventh day. The people said to Israel, people of Israel called the bread manna. It was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafers made from honey. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Take an omer of manna and keep it for the generations to come, so they can see that the bread I gave you to eat in the desert when I brought you out of Egypt." So Moses said to Aaron, "Take a jar and put an omer of manna in it. Then place it before the Lord to be kept for the generations to come." As the Lord commanded Moses, Aaron put the manna in front of the testimony that it might be kept. The Israelites ate manna for 40 days until they came to a land that was settled. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan. An omer is 1/10 of an ephah.
Thank you.
Yes,
So I bet we know what more wiser than we were before. If we don't know what an omer is, or we don't know what an ephah is, we're in difficulty. And I haven't looked it up, so I can't say.
It says in my study Bible, it's just over 2 litres.
How much?
Just over 2 litres.
2 litres.
Yeah.
2 litres.
Right. So they had 4 litres on the Friday, so they didn't have to go and pick up 2 litres on the Saturday.
Yeah.
So verse 34 is taking us. It's jumped the story several chapters. And Moses, who wrote this, is looking back into the situation. There's often been debates about who wrote this account, who recorded these things, because the people weren't that literate. There wasn't printing in those days. So, who manually kept these records? But of course, Moses was educated with the best possible education that was available in the world at that time. So as he was brought up as if he were a son of Pharaoh, he had the best of everything, including education. So he was well able. So we'll come back to verse 34 and verse 33 and 34 a little bit later, but let's just go back and have a look at the situation. So it's wonderful that each day they have the manna for the day, and it's wonderful that it's nice and even, that everybody has enough. But there's this issue that they were not to hold on to it and to keep it. And if they did hold on to it, there was a risk, well, actually not a risk, a certainty that it was going to go rotten. So while God is providing for them, he's also teaching them about this issue of daily provision. I think as Christians today, we also need to remember that. It's ever so easy for us to get into a situation where we think, oh, God has supplied, or, everything we need. And in my Christian life, God has provided amazing things. I'm sure he has for all of us. But it's only providing what we need at a time. It isn't in order to give us a super abundance. So the concept of the teaching about if you obedient to the Lord, God's going to give you millions of pounds to reward you for your faithfulness is obviously clearly a nonsense. God just provides for the day. I want to go back to the point that David was making about the importance of the needs of others. We've got 6 supermarkets in Market Harborough, and there's a guy who sits outside Sainsbury's who has chosen to sleep rough. It's his choice. I'm sure that people have been moved and wanted to do things for him, but he's there all the time. So those who know Market Harborough will know the chap I'm talking about. But it's sort of ironic that he's sitting there with his cap in hand, and he's utterly dependent upon the generosity of people giving him enough so that he'll get through another day. And the people pushing these enormous baskets that are overflowing with stuff, much more than they need. People coming out of the supermarkets with possibly twice as much as they normally would need. And if it was for a day's supply, they must have a family of about 20, I should think. But how foolish and awful it is that on one hand there's a superabundance, and on the other hand there is nothing. And God cares about each individual, and we need to be sensitive to what God might be saying to us that he wants us to do with regard to those who are in need, not just sitting out supermarkets, but we think of parts of the world where people are struggling to survive. And I don't know what people's practices with regard to things like tithing, and whether you use some of your tithing for the meeting of people's needs in other parts of the world. Anybody want to come back in and comment about it? So I need to think, what God has given me today, who does he want me to share it with?
I think it's always a good idea to try to include in your giving an organisation that does support the poor, either in your own locality and or in the world generally. I mean, we've tried to do that even when we didn't have a regular income, and God has never let us go short because of that. And it's made us feel, we still feel glad that we've been able to do that, thankful that we've been able to do that, really. And when we've told people about God's provision, when we haven't had a regular, sort of an assured income, put it that way, we've included that and said, you know, we've always been able to give to people like Tear Fund and other organizations. We haven't had to stop doing that. Because I think some people have said, well, we couldn't ever tithe because we haven't been able to afford it, or, you know, we wouldn't be able to give to charities because we haven't had enough coming in. And we always felt, when John gave up his salary and we felt God was calling us to live in a less definite way, and God did provide enough, because we always felt those things were important to give, and we were never without enough to be able to do that. And so, you know, we were thankful to be able to give, as well as look after ourselves.
Yeah, is the principle behind this, and this principle of what we pray for when we say the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread, is seeing that all we have, where they had to labor each day, apart from the Sabbath, which wasn't a Sabbath then, as David was pointing out last week. We haven't got to the bit where they've got the 10 Commandments. So at the moment, they don't have a formal Sabbath, but they're putting it into practice. They're having a day of rest. Word Sabbath means to rest or cease from your labor. So it's the principle, in a sense, that we ought always to see that it's God's provision. We might have a lucrative job, or we might have only just enough to get by on pension or whatever it is, but do we see it as God's provision for us? Therefore, what we do with it, we need to consider what God would expect of us. Moses gets angry with the people because they don't do what they should do, and the Lord says to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commands and instructions? So God is angry. And I'm just wondering whether, as it's part of what it means to be a Christian and to be a disciple of Jesus, we ought to consider the daily provision that we experience as God's provision, and therefore be mindful and prayerful about what he would want us to do with it. Okay?
I think that's one of the most challenging things. I remember someone once said, the last thing about a person to be converted is their wallet. Because I think we live in a world where it is about having that security that's based on the amount of money you've got. And it's very scary to think, well, look, we need to live like that. They once, I've forgotten the actual figure, I think it was something like John Wesley lived on, I think it was about 40 shillings a year. And even when he became a multi-millionaire, he still lived on 46.
Yes.
And gave the rest to his church and to those in need.
Yeah, thank you, David. I heard of someone who started out deciding they were going to tithe, and so they gave a tenth, and God blessed them, and their income increased, and so they increased the proportion that they were giving, and they ended up keeping a tenth of their income and giving 9/10 of it away because they had a sufficiently large income. They were able to do that and were glad to do it. Quite an amazing thing, isn't it, that they ended up tithing to themselves and giving 9/10 away to others.
I was somebody who never would have expected to be able to live on the promise that God would provide for our needs. I was sort of last, well, perhaps I'm not the last person, I'm probably the last but one person who would have thought that we could live like that I could live like that. And I went away to do some training for teaching, and I was talking to a younger girl who was a Christian, and I did, the conversation came round to what did we live on? And I did tell her that people put money in envelopes and pushed it through our letterbox. And she said, oh, I'd heard about people who live like that. I've never actually met anyone. And so I thought, gosh, I didn't ever think that anybody would say that to me, that I would come into that category. But I mean, after I'd left that particular course, God did, extraordinary things after that, which actually I don't think I ever had the chance to tell her about those things. But I certainly wasn't, and I never thought that we would do any theological training. And I certainly didn't think I would ever go into any kind of church work, because the friend who was the most influential really in my coming to faith had gone to a Bible college in South Wales, and it was run in quite a Spartan kind of way, and they used to have all-night prayer meetings, and they used to have to scrub all the floors themselves. And I thought, well, they're not going to catch me doing anything like that. And St John's College in Nottingham didn't require us to scrub the floors or have all-night prayer meetings. So, it wasn't something as a young person I ever imagined I would be able to do. And yet looking back on it, it seems to me terribly easy, really. And so very, very strange, really, that, it is a gift that God gave us to be able to live by trusting him for money.
Yes.
Extraordinary.
Yes. And it's wonderful to have testimonies to share of how God has kept his promises and provided for us. So if we have testimonies, it's a good thing. You notice that there were two people who came along and reported it to Moses to let him know how it was working out. So that's quite intriguing that people fed back, you'll have to pardon the pun, fed back while they were being fed. So that testifying to what God has done was an important factor as well. I think you were alluding to Derwenvar and Rees Howell's Bible College in what you were saying. And I used to stay there every other year. I used to stay there for a week and minister to the students. And I was there for my birthday on one occasion, and they broke their rules with regards to cooking on a Sunday, and they made a cake for me because my birthday happened to fall on the Sunday, and they discovered. So they made me a cake, and then they sang happy birthday to me. First the girls sang it, and then the boys sang it. I wept into my baked beans that we had. It was so moving. It was really a wonderful experience, but a great ministry. And when I was working in Mission for Christ, we had students from Var who used to come from the Bible College of Wales and used to train and work with us. And one of them is now one of the leaders of the house church movement nationally in the UK. And there are others doing great work in various places. We are told a little bit about what it tasted like, okay? Tasted like wafers made with honey. Does that ring any bells with anything in the Psalms? What's sweeter than the honey and the honeycomb? More to be desired are they than gold, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. So nobody remembers.
I was thinking of the story of Samson and Delilah.
Okay, yes, but the psalmist says that God's word is sweeter than honey, and it's a precious thing. I'm just thinking about sharing God's word with other people as well. Not keeping the word to ourselves. It's great to be able to say, I'm saved, I'm going to heaven. Sorry about that lady down the road. But we can share God's word. God gives us opportunities. If we pray about it, God will give us opportunities for sharing what he gives. Let's then drop down to verse 33 and 34. Moses says to Aaron, take a jar, put an omer of manna in it, then put it before the Lord. Now, they didn't have the tabernacle at that time. They hadn't built the tabernacle. They had a meeting tent, and they had a place where God used to come and meet with them. And so that Aaron puts this bit of manna in the pot, and he stands it in the place for the Lord. And later, Moses, writing about it, says that it was put, the manna was put with the tablets of the covenant law so that it might be preserved. So the story of God's provision was permanently kept. Where was it kept? Who remembers where it was kept? There were three things. One was the tablets on which the law had been written. Another thing was Aaron's rod, which miraculously started to sprout. And the third thing was a pot of manna.
Thing.
Where did they
In the
keep
Ark
it?
of the Covenant.
Jean says the Ark of the Covenant.
And Jean is right. Okay. So it was kept in the Ark of the Covenant, which was in the Holy of Holies within the tabernacle and later within the temple. So what we have got is testimony to the giving of the law, to God's way, that God has a way of instructions that he wants his people to live by. This is under the first covenant. So there's the rules of living under the covenant. There's an expression of God's miraculous power in Aaron's rod that budded, and God's gracious provision in the pot of manna. These three things were inside the ark. Nothing else was inside the ark. Over the top was the big golden slab on which the blood used to be. On the Day of Atonements, the high priest would bring in a bowl of blood and an incense burner making smoke. And the glory of the Lord used to be revealed in the midst of this, above the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark wasn't a boat, it was just a wooden box. And it had these important symbols of God's purposes, God's power, and God's provision. All those three P's were in the box. And they represented God's dealings with his people in the past, which time and again they forgot. They needed a permanent reminder of these things. So that's why they did it, because it's all too easy to forget and to fall away from the things of God. Right. Have we finished with the manna? Okay.
I feel rather sorry for Moses being chastised for these rather stupid people who went out to collect the manna on the seventh day, because I think in any group of people, particularly this large, you're bound to get some stupid people, aren't you, who can't take in the instructions or forget the instructions. I mean,
yeah. In the email I sent out, Dorothy, I asked the question about how did we feel people were feeling as their journey, as they're going on this journey, which Paul, when he writes the letter to the Corinthians, comes to chapter 10, he says, these things are recorded for us. Whether they got it wrong, it's there as a warning to us. So if you read the opening part of chapter 10 of 1 Corinthians, you read Paul saying why we've got these things written down. They're there so that we might learn from them. It's really quite important. But how do you think they felt? I said in my email, how do children feel? Do you think they used to say, are we there yet? Children do often when they travel today. Do you think there were some older people who said, well, I'm glad we're not going any further today. I've just gone about as far as I can. And how did Moses feel, getting all the grumbles and complaints? Excuse me. But also, how did God feel about it? This was his plan.
Mm.
This is his purpose. How did the people feel? I think it's quite an important question to ask, to think about it, to think behind the passages that we read, the words, the actual words we read, and think about it a bit more. Okay, if we're done, we go over to chapter 17. Are you ready?
Yeah, can I just ask you a question, that Carol?
Of course.
Did you say that there were two people who came and reported to Moses? Is
I
that
did.
right?
And if we haven't read it in the passage we've read it, it's in the next passage.
All right, because I was looking all the way through the passage and couldn't see where that happened, you see, and I thought, oh.
Oh no, I'm delighted it made you look it up.
Yes.
I was thinking, I missed that bit.
I know. Or is it a different translation or something?
You can look for it in Exodus chapter 17.
Right. Okay.
Over the page or whatever, so we're ready for the next continuation of the story. All of this aspect of God's provision are sort of put together. So there's the provision of water, there's the provision of manna, there's the provision of meat, and it's all together. So we've got the first 7 verses of chapter 17 continues the story of God's provision. And all of this, just to say again, I know it's pretty obvious, all of this was that they needed to learn who their God was. So they're learning about who their God was. That's what we have to do. It's exactly the same as we have to do. So we go through circumstances of difficulty. The journey of life takes us through rocky, difficult areas, barren areas, and so on. And we have to learn to hold on to God's hand and keep our eyes on him and follow where he's leading and guiding, just as he was leading and guiding the people of Israel by the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, symbols of his presence. So we're into chapter 17, and we need somebody to read, somebody who hasn't read already, please, to read through. There are only 2 perhaps difficult words in verse 7, Massah and Meribah. Massah and Meribah. Don't think there's any other difficult words anywhere.
Okay. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me." The Lord answered Moses, "Walk on ahead of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled, and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?"
Thank you, John. Massah means, Meribah means quarreling. And go back and look up what Massah means, because my
testing apparently.
Testing. Thank you. So it's the same old story of the people of Israel complaining that things aren't just right for them, and sometimes in our Christian life we pass through times when it seems that nothing's quite right. And has God forgotten to keep his promises? It's ever so easy to think that he has. We have said before that the desert of Sin is nothing to do with behavior. It gets its name, it's generally thought that it gets its name from Sinai, which was the mountain that they're heading towards. And they've come to a place called Rephidim. And a very significant thing happens in Rephidim, which we'll think about, God willing, next week. We haven't time to deal with it today. So we just consider this issue of God's provision of water for them and how it's dealt with. So they're quarreling with Moses. Again, they're quarreling with Moses. Give us water to drink. And he's responding is, why do you put the Lord to the test? Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? So in what sense do you think they are putting the Lord to the test?
Well, you think they would have learned from the fact that God told Moses to tell the people not to carry any food over into the next day, because he'd already promised that he would provide their needs for each day. And therefore, they've wasted what he's provided for them. And then if they thought about it, he allowed them to gather double what was needed for one day because they needed it for the Sabbath. And therefore, God made sure that what they needed for the next day didn't get full of maggots and smell. So it's a contradiction, I know, but each of the different circumstances, he provided fully for the people's needs. So why would they now doubt that he wouldn't somehow provide water? They've got to learn to trust him.
I'm 100% with you. I'm pleased to say that I think it was a sense in which they were pushing the issue of God's grace. God is gracious. He provides for us. He provided for them. And this phrase, quarreling with Moses and saying, give us water to drink. And the way Moses responds, you're putting the Lord to the test. I can imagine them saying, how is he going to do it? You know, what's he going to do now? There's a certain amount of presumptuousness, perhaps, behind the scene. But surely God ought to be supplying our need. What's wrong with God? Why isn't he providing us for us? I don't know if that is true, but it just seems that there's something going on in their attitude that isn't spelt out here that suggests that it might just be that they've become a bit presumptuous about God turning up and doing miracles for them.
I can understand why they're upset, though. It's the fact that Moses, that they stopped at Rephidim. They actually camped there, and you'd expect when you stop and camp somewhere that there would be a supply of water, as not just for themselves but for their livestock. You know, it seems very strange to me camping somewhere where there was no water.
It's interesting, John. You said that it would be natural for them to expect there to be water where they've got to camp.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. And that may have been their attitude. You know, we've come here. You know, surely God ought to be doing something for it. Surely God ought to be supplying our need. There ought to be an expectation, and I think there is a distinction between a quiet trust in God, a quiet assumption that God is a God who keeps his promises. God is a God who never fails or never ever let us down. So on one hand, to have that quiet assumption is one thing, but to turn it into the kind of give me attitude that the people of Israel seem to show in this stage in their journey, that they're just concerned about what God is going to do for them, how is God going to meet their need, is another. So making that differentiation between a quiet trust and a demanding attitude is important.
How Moses felt about all this, because it's 5 million people, didn't you say, were on the move?
Because I didn't quite get what you said.
Did you say there were 5 million people on the move the other week?
Yes.
And how must Moses have felt? Because he was a bit reluctant to take on this task, because he did when God was expecting him to go and talk to the Pharaoh, and he says, "I'm not a very articulate man. I can't put words together." But God obviously saw in him a great leader, and then he provided Aaron to liaise. But the thought of 5 million people all muttering and moaning between them and all picking on the one man must have been quite onerous for him, overwhelming.
Yes. In one place he says, they're not my children. I didn't have them. They're your children, God. You so it's very thing. But there, here in verse 4 says the people were ready to stone him.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's difficult if you're a leader in a church. Clive.
It's called human nature.
Yes.
It happens all the time, doesn't it? Where is this God?
Yeah.
Why doesn't he do this? All the time.
I mean, you can see it really sadly in Iran, can't you? You know, it was the people who enabled the Ayatollah to come back in 1979, because it was the people who'd risen up against the Shah and got rid of the Shah. And now, of course, the people are rising up against the second Ayatollah and might enable the Shah's son to come back. And you think, well, you know, the same set of problems have caused the same country people to rise up against their leaders. And you think, you know, are they going to be feeling the same in another 20 or 30 years' time? You know, let's get rid of this leader because they've led us into, and you know, it's because there's no perfect system, is there? That's going to keep everyone happy, and that's what everybody wants. They want to be kept happy, and we all do, really. Sadly.
One of the sad things is I see this in church life.
Yeah.
In situations where a church has been through a difficult patch and prays and looks to God to meet their needs, and God supplies them with a loving, caring pastor who looks after them, and the church starts to grow and prosper, and things are going forward, everything's happening. And before you know it, they're grumbling and complaining again, saying, "We really need to get rid of this chap. You know, we could do with somebody else." So sense of dissatisfaction. Lynn.
I was just thinking, listening to all this, and then thinking how Jesus was treated. The expectation on Jesus was the same. You know, he was there, he was going to cure everything, he was the Messiah, he was going to do this. And it wasn't like that. And they turned on him.
Yes.
So it's just sort of balancing, isn't it? It's
yes.
It's very much the same.
The wonderful thing about the people turning against Jesus is that by their very awful behavior of turning against Jesus, God used that to bring about our salvation.
Yes. Yes.
And through his death on the cross, through his rejection, he was despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, as it says in Isaiah 60. And it's that rejection has brought about our salvation, which is an amazing thing. But in Christian life, it's a good thing to remember that, isn't it? And to know he suffered. So we're his disciples. There was a time when, I think it might have been Philip, I'm not sure which one of the disciples, said when Jesus was determined to go to Jerusalem, well, we might as well go as well and die there with him as well if he's going to go. And we should have an attitude that's willing to lay down our lives for others. The Bible says if God so loved the world that he gave his only son, then we also ought to love and be willing to sacrifice ourselves for others. And Isaac Watts wrote that amazing hymn, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, where he talks about sacrifice. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. If we're followers of Jesus, then we ought to be willing to let go of everything. There's no pathway to fame or anything else if we want to be followers of Jesus. So what about verse 3, the question, why did you bring us up out of Egypt? And we talked about this last week, about how easy it is to forget where you're supposed to be going and why you're going there. So they were God's people. God was fulfilling his promise that he gave to Abraham, their forefathers before them, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God is fulfilling his promise. He's got a plan and a purpose. He's leading and guiding. But it's ever so easy to have our eyes on the immediate rather than on the long-term plan. While we've been talking, I was thinking about Ananias and Sapphira and the experience of their greed, that they tried to cheat God, held on to some of the money from selling some of their property, and then told lies about it, said that we've given it all to God. We haven't held on to any of it when they had. And of course, they suffered the consequence of lying to the Holy Spirit, which was very sad. But the danger is that we lose the vision for what God has called us to be and do, Okay, let's talk about how the miracle happens. Anybody want to ask any questions about what God tells him to do? He tells him to go and stand in front of a rock, and then he's to take his staff. What was his staff for? It was a symbol of God's power and God's authority. It's a shepherd's staff that he holds in his hand. It's a symbol of his acting on God's behalf as a shepherd of his people. And he's to take that, and he's to use that, which was a sign of God's judgment and anger at one time, and he's to do it as a sign of God's provision in the present. And he's to strike the rock and water will come out. Now in Numbers 20, we read of a similar occasion where Moses gets into trouble because he's told on an occasion he was to speak to the rock and water would come out, but he doesn't speak to the rock. He strikes it, not just once, but he strikes it twice. The idea isn't have two taps, it's real two slams. And because of that, God wouldn't allow Moses to lead the people into the promised land, and he had to hand it over to Joshua. And because of the same sin, Aaron also dies about that time. So that's all written down in, I think I'm right in saying, Numbers chapter 20. So another bit, if you note it down, you can look it up later on. And perhaps I'll send some of the references out to you as well. But anybody want to talk about this amazing miracle that's taking place? How did God do it?
The words that really stood out for me, and quite surprisingly, is verse 6, where the Lord says to Moses, I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Quite startling, really. The Lord said he's actually going to stand there. Well,
yeah.
I wonder if the other people would see him or not.
Yes. Well, we don't know. We don't know that there are occasions in the Old Testament where it talks about God being present and he has like human appearance. So it may be that they saw someone there. We don't read that they're seeing the glory of the Lord there, but they certainly should have been able to see something. But the important thing was that here's a rock in a weary place, okay, in a dry land, okay. Jesus is a rock in a weary land. And so God is saying, I just want you to stand in front of this rock, and I want you to strike the rock so that the water can come out. Well, everybody knows that's what happens with rocks normally, doesn't it? You know. But he's saying, but I'm going to be there. You can trust me in this. Just do what I say and see what I'm going to do. And Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. What is actually happening here is scientifically referred to as an artesian aquifer. An artesian aquifer. Under the surface of the earth, the mantle of the earth, there is a vast storage of water. Scientists tell us that there's approximately 3 times more under the surface of the earth than there is on the surface of the earth. So just imagine the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Arctic, all the oceans of the world. and 3 times more is actually under the surface. This huge amount of water, and it's in different situations. Some of it is sandwiched between impenetrable, non-porous rock. So it might be saturating a certain amount of rock, something like chalk, but it's in between impervious rock and under the surface of the earth, and it's under pressure. And I don't know if you've ever seen a picture or you know anything about artesian wells, but because I grew up in Sussex near to Beachy Head, I was familiar with artesian wells in Eastbourne, and in this Eastbourne area between Eastbourne and Brighton, there are artesian wells where water comes from the chalk that's in the chalk below the surface, and it's under sufficient pressure to actually flow out. So it flows out. Some of it flows into wells, some of it flows into streams. And so what we've got here is the miracle that is happening here is that the rock is parting and the water is coming out. So God knows where there was water. He knew where there was water. But what is actually happening here, I don't think of it as being a strange miracle. I think it's wonderful. Just at that time, the water comes out, but the water will be coming from below the earth's surface. And that is what is coming out at that time in that place. And only because Moses does what God tells him to do, does it actually come. So the provision was there. It just needed to be tapped into, pardon the pun. And so that's what they had to do to make sure it comes. But it's quite an amazing thing that there is all this water under the earth. And in the story of the flood with Noah, it tells us that some of the water came from above, from the sky, and some of the water came up out of the earth. So there was a releasing of this huge amount of water under the earth. So scientists have only relatively recently discovered this. I caught a program on the radio in the middle of the night 2 days ago talking about an enormous lake that's under the ice in the Arctic. That there's a lake that is bigger than any lake, I believe, on the surface, and so it's an actual pool of water that is actually under. And when the water comes up, it's beautifully pure and beautifully, it's very satisfying water that comes up out of these artesian supplies. Anybody want to comment, argue, question? We haven't got David with us now, so you can argue as much as you like. Now, David is very helpful. He raises interesting points.
He does.
I think it's a shame that it goes straight on with the war with the Amalekites. I'd like to have known a bit about the reaction of the people. Verse 7.
We'll have to blame Moses for that.
Yeah.
Have a grumble to Moses. He's used to grumble.
I'll add to his grumblers.
Yes. It does seem a huge omission because it was a spectacular miracle. And gave them what they wanted, and yet there's no note of, as you say, any reaction.
I'm sure that they were, if they actually saw it, we know that there were some elders that were there who saw it. And if you read the parallel passage from Numbers, you'll read more about that. But some of them, no doubt, saw the miracle happen. Others just enjoyed it.
Yes.